Lance, obviously, I want to wish you long life on the Yahrzeit of your mom, which is tomorrow night. But since we're not doing a share on Friday night, I want you just to obviously say it in her name. Not that I can't read the name, but you might want to tell us about your mom for a minute or two, and we'll do the share in her dedication. Pleasure.
Thanks. Yeah. So my mom, yeah, she passed away during COVID, 2020, and so if you can learn in Nishmas, Masha, but Aharon Levi. She was a very special lady and taught us a lot, and um, it was a big shock and a big loss when she went. It was completely by surprise, and yes, thanks very much. It starts tomorrow night, Yahrzeit.
Right, we wish you long life. And Lance, it was a surprise because I thought your father, not to be disrespectful, would go before your
He did. My father went literally 4 months before my mom.
That's right.
So my father was quite sickly. My mom her health was all right. So the doctor said that she could do another 10 years. But within 4 months of my dad passing away, she passed away.
Sure, it often happens with souls that have been together a long time. On some spiritual level, they can't cope without their life partner. It's very common that. Doesn't make you feel any
Yeah.
better, but it really is common. It's indicative of a good symbiotic relationship. Him the link. And the Gemara starts with a question. It says, the Gemara basically questions the wording and order of the Mishnah because it says, to what is our Tana of the Mishnah referring? That he asks, from when may we fulfill the obligation to recite the Shema in the evening? Now, if you look, if you look at the oddity of that, what strikes you there, guys, as a little bit odd? In other words, if I say to you, Gavin, and we're doing Microsoft training, what time are you going to be at the plant? And there's nothing in the calendar. What's your first question to me? Who are we training? Like, what are you talking about? What time? What are we doing? Who are we training? Where are they? What do you mean, what time? So the Gemara starts off in a very odd way. Do you get it? It asks, what time are we doing the Shema? So that's the first issue in the Gemara is you have to ask the question, why would it ask such a strange question? From when may we fulfill the obligation to recite the Shema in the evening? So the Tana's inquiry concerning the time for reciting the Shema is giving a presupposition, and that is the existence of an obligation to recite the Shema. So where do you think the obligation is taught? That's the first thing I want to ask you guys. Guys, I want to fly as quickly as possible.
All right, it must have been on Sinai.
Well, firstly, what is the problem? Lance, you want to summarize what the problem is? What the Tana's question?
I've got no idea what the problem is. I think it's a regular question.
Well, it's saying, well, when is the time to do the Shema? And the commentary
Any
say
mitzvah
that there's a big problem. The problem is the order. The first thing you actually have to say, if I give you a set of instructions, you could say, well, how do I know this? How do I know this? So the problem is it's giving a presupposition, assuming that there is in fact an obligation to do the Shema. So when the Tana of the Mishnah poses the question, when are we to do the Shema? The first question the Gemara asks is, I think the Tana should backtrack a bit. And we first have to ask the primary question, and that is, where is there an obligation taught in terms of the existence to recite the Shema? Okay?
It's in the Torah.
Correct. So the obligation to recite the Shema, in fact, is in the Shema. And how do we know that? There are three verses in the Shema. The first one is in Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4 to 9. That's the first paragraph. The second paragraph is in chapter 11, verse 13 to 21. The third paragraph is a bit of a tricky one because that's in Bamidbar, which is Numbers, chapter 15, verse 37 to 41, which deals more with the obligation of guarding your eyes and your thoughts and wearing tzitzit. So the third one, there is more of a disconnection as far as that's concerned. And the Gemara says, furthermore, why does the Tana teach the law regarding the Shema of the evening first? What the Gemara is proposing is let the Tana teach the law regarding the Shema of the morning first. Because if you have a look in Exodus in Shemot, chapter 29, verse 39, if you look in the 29th verse, what does it discuss there? The daily Tamid offering. And what it does do is it lists the order in which we perform in the day. You get up in the morning, you do the morning Tamid before the afternoon Tamid. So the Gemara is proposing first here, maybe discuss the morning Shema according to the routine of a normal person's day as you get up, and then discuss the evening Shema. Even the Tosfot brings this up. So why does the Tana bring up the evening Shema first? Has anybody got a thought? Guys?
I think the morning
Well, we
one is
started.
straightforward.
Pardon, Lance and then Gavin? Lance started, then
Well,
Gavin?
we start the day at night. We don't start the day in the morning. The night comes first.
Okay, on what basis? You good?
The day starts at sunset.
Correct. So there's two ways to look at this. The first one is what is our normal routine? And the routine is when a person gets up during the day. Because if you think about it, you are still up when the evening comes. It's the end of your day. It might be when the world has got almost a creation point that begins in the evening with a new spiritual date and energy, but that's not when your routine starts. So the Gemara says, why not teach the morning first? And the Gemara answers that the reason where the position of where the Tana is coming from, one of them is according to what Gavin said, but the first thing you've got to do is actually look at the wording because it says of bashachpacha of kumecha. And what does that mean? These matters when you lie down and when you arise. So what it's actually trying to say is that if you look at the first verse in Devarim chapter 6 verse 7, it's instructing you about how it should work. Because if you have a look at Rav Eliezer, the sages, and Rabban Gamliel, all of them are telling you that it doesn't have to do with the period at night. It has a lot to do with sleeping patterns of the average person in the community. The first one is when you're going to sleep, the other one is when you are asleep, and the other one is when you're still asleep. Those are the three opinions. So the fact of it is when you lie down and when you arise is critical. It's not just the fact that it's at night, but the verse itself, the commandment is about saying it prior to sleep and prior to sleep and immediately upon arousing. Okay, so that's your first evidence of proof. The second thing is that, and this is what the Mishnah is saying, that the time for reciting the Shema of lying down, what is that? Why does it bring this thing in the Mishnah from the time that Kohanim who were Tamei may enter to eat their teruma? In other words, if you're looking at the Tana's point of reference in the verse, it teaches the obligation to recite the Shema by looking at the wording. And what does the wording say? Of b'shach b'chav kumecha. You have to do it before lying down and immediately upon arising. And the Tana does the same. So the question that I've got for you guys is what reference does it make, in context of what difference does it make about the Kohanim and the Truma and the immersion and coming out? What does the one thing have to do with another? You can actually see it within the actual obligation itself. Why bring that? Anybody have a thought? Guys, I feel like I'm speaking
Well,
to.
well, aren't they trying to show you that because you can only eat that the truma up until 12, right?
Yes, so you're onto something there, is that obviously it's not about learning with the Shema. Because if you want to say that the reason that we graded on the Kohanim time of when they're able to eat the truma, that's Tzeit HaKochavim, when the stars come out, the three minor stars. So why don't you just say, and leave the Kohen thing out of it, when the three stars come out, that's when you can do the Shema. That's the earliest time when you can do the Shema. Why bring this whole thing of the Kohanim? That's what the Gemara is asking. You can make the same point without going through that whole elongated process. So,
But it isn't the one giving you a range like that. It's giving you from the 3 stars till 12.
so you're right in the sense that, in fact, um, you're right in the sense that there is a range, and the ranges are twofold. The first range is the earliest time to say it, which is not actually what the discussion is necessarily of the latter part of the Mishnah. It's in the former part of the Mishnah, but the latter part of the Mishnah does give you a range in terms of what's the latest time to complete it by. But what the Mishnah is going to go through, the commentary in the Gemara, is what's the right time to start it. That's not too early and the correct starting time. Okay, so the Mishnah is going to deal with those two issues, starting time and the correct ending time. So we're going to go back to the point of why the Kohanim were mentioned, because all I'm saying, Gavin, is the Gemara's point is you can just say bottom line, when you lie down and when you rise, and when people generally do it, you don't have to go through this issue with the Kohanim and eating the teruma and immersion and tuma and when is a good time. The two don't seem to necessarily need each other. Certainly you don't need it to derive the Shema. What you need it for is to know the end time, is when you have to say it by, because you know you can't say it until after dawn, because it uses that point for the sacrificial meats, not for teruma, because the sacrificial meats, teruma is a crop. The sacrificial meats have to be cooked and consumed at midnight so you don't get kares in dawn. Do you get what I'm saying? They're two completely separate issues. So that's what the Gemara is saying. You can mention it at the end, but why mention it at the beginning? It doesn't have really that much bearing on it. So we've got to learn why. So then the Gemara discusses an alternative source for the Tana's decision to discuss the evening Shema first, and Gavin was right on the money. And it says, and if you prefer to say that the Tanas learned this order from the creation of the world, because we learn in Berachos, as you know, there was evening and morning and one day, and that is one day. Genesis in the first chapter, I think it's verse 5. So we set from the order of creation that the daily cycles begin with the night and ends with the day. The way we celebrate every Chag is it starts in the evening and ends by sunset the following day. Therefore, the Tana first discusses the time for the evening Shema and then discusses the time for the morning Shema. So the Gemara says, okay, it seems to make sense, but then why do you need that second explanation? Because if that's so, then if you look at the end of the Mishnah in 11a, in Berachos, it basically is in the wording itself. Because, you've got B'shach B'chav Kumecha, but more than that, what we don't understand is if you compare the second daf of what we're doing now to the Gemara said to the Mishnah in 11a. In 11a, it actually discusses the morning 2 blessings before the Shema and 1 blessing afterwards, in that order. And in the evening, it discusses 2 blessings before the Shema and the 2 blessings afterwards. So it's saying if that's the case of the way it's teaching the halacha, why doesn't the Tana teach the law regarding the Shema of the evening first? In other words, why would they choose a different? Why would the Tana choose a different order? Does that make sense? Because the Gemara asks this question only in response to the second answer, not the first. Because the verse regarding creation teaches this general rule that night comes before a day, exactly as Gavin said. And if that rule was the Tanna's reason for explaining the laws of the evening Shema before those of the morning Shema, he could have followed the same rule by explaining the laws of the blessing of the Shema as well. So why did this Tanna decide to basically speak of the evening Shema first and then before the morning in the cycle of the day? Because the verse itself, when you lie down and when you rise, speaks of night before day. So it's saying you don't even need the second part. If you look at B'shach B'chal Kumecha, it's there. You don't even have to speak of the creation of the world. But the Gemara answers, then you've got a further problem, because if you have a look in 11a, it teaches it the opposite way round in a way. In other words, when you're looking at the, Gavin, what do you call it? The brachas before the Shema and the after Shema? It's not the Shema itself. Lance, what's the technical term? The
I don't know. I know
preceding and successionary brachas. So that's taught in the morning and the evening. So we say, well, then why is that cycle different? Why does that follow the human cycle of when we wake up and when we go to bed? So the answer of it is fairly straightforward, as it wasn't that case. When the Tana actually taught it, he did teach it exactly as Gavin said, for whether you choose the reason of creation or the reason of Kumecha in the verse, and when you lie down and when you arise, either way the Tana did teach that. But what he did is he taught the evening, and then he taught the morning. And then what happened was the students asked him in the morning, well, is that it? We just do the Shema. And he said, no. There's basically two brachas before and one bracha after. And since we're learning what's happening in the morning, and we go back to the evening Shema, we're going to say there's two brachas before the Shema of the evening and two brachas after. So what he was delineating was actually an explanation of the preceding brachas and successive brachas of the Shema in the order in which it was asked about people doing their routine. But that's not how he taught it. He taught it in the evening first and then the morning, based on not only the verse, but the way creation works. So Gavin, you're right. It's just sorting out that contradiction. Why did he teach the before and after brachas in the order at which we wake up? It was because the students only asked him when they got to this morning's prayer, are there any before and after brachas? And he answered that in the morning context. And then afterwards he said, by the way, in the evening, there's two brachas afterwards, not just one like the Shema. There's two in the beginning and then two after. Okay. Now the Gemara now looks at the second statement of the Mishnah. And it says, the masters said in the Mishnah that basically, let me just get the Aramaic words, from the time that Kohanim who were Tameh may enter to eat their teruma. Okay, you read that with me. I don't have to share the screen. Do you remember reading that, Gav?
Say again?
Do you remember reading that? That in the Mishnah turned around and said, from when may we fulfill the obligation to recite the Shema in the evening? From the time that Kohanim who were Tameh may enter to eat their teruma at
Yeah,
nightfall.
yeah,
Okay, so
I didn't hear that.
immediately it brings this case of the Kohen being eligible to eat his teruma once nightfall appears. So the Gemara asks, it says, look, let us look at this. When do Kohanim who were Tameh permitted to eat teruma? They first have to immerse themselves in a mikveh, and that has to be technically during the day. It could be a minute before the day passes, but they have to already be submerged and immersed. Okay? And then when they get out of there, they have to wait for the stars that appear in the evening, and then they can eat the teruma. But they still have to have the intent the next day of bringing the sacrifices, but it doesn't prevent them from eating teruma, only sacrificial meats, not the crop. So it's saying, let the Mishnah say explicitly that you can recite the evening Shema from the stars the times appear. Because if you look at when Kohanim are eligible to eat the teruma, when is that, Gav?
They're eligible from sunset to 12.
No, that's the sacrificial meats. But they're eligible to eat their teruma. If they're in a state
Ah,
of
no,
what do they have to do first?
when they're eligible. They're eligible if they're purified, if they're not
Correct. They have to go in the mikveh during the day, and they have to come out. And once there are three small stars, at that point where it's considered halachic night, at that point they're eligible to, when the three stars appear, tzet kochavim, to eat their teruma. They still have to bring their sacrifices the next day, but they can have the crop set aside for them by Klal Yisrael.
But they only have to go to the mikveh
If they impure.
what's it called? If
Well,
they're impure.
yeah,
If
I
they're
mean
not
they can
impure,
eat
then it's not an issue.
they can eat truma during the day then. This is a case
Yeah, they
only of
can eat truma
impurity.
any time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need to
So
impure.
what the Gemara is saying is, why teach it in such a roundabout way? Why go through this whole coin thing? We understand in the begin, in the end, Lance, when you're talking about midnight, there's kares. If they wait until dawn, and you say any mitzvah that is a midnight mitzvah in terms of time limit, you can technically, biblically do it until dawn, but we cut it off at night to protect us from sin. And it's the same with the sages eating the sacrificial meats and the ones that brought the sacrifice, enjoying it with the Kohanim. And it's the same for any other mitzvah, including the Shema. We see the link there. But the Gemara is saying you don't need that link in terms of knowing when to start the Shema. Because if you know that to start the Shema is when the three stars come out, well, all you have to say is when the three stars come out and it's official night, you can start the Shema. You don't even have to bring this Kohen issue up. It's not relevant here. It's Teruma.
Aren't they bringing it
So
up possibly? Can I ask you something? Aren't they bringing it up possibly to show you the seriousness of it? That even though it's not kares or something, not to do it, and it's a mitzvah just to do it, you don't get the mitzvah. They're trying to show you how important it actually is to take this like very seriously, you know. It's kind of as important type of thing.
So you're on the right track in that it's coming to teach you a rule more about Kohanim than the Shema, because you can learn the rule of Shema from just saying when it's halachic night, three stars come out. So it's obviously coming to teach us something serious about the Kohanim. That's spot on. Otherwise, just say you're doing Shema earliest time when the three stars come out. Lance, what were you going to say? We're going to see what it's going to cover
Well,
now. Well done.
Damon, you know what? The truma is something you can have any time as long
Correct.
as you're pure.
Correct.
You can have in the morning, the afternoon.
Correct.
So why
That's
do
what I
they
said to
link
Gavin.
truma? Yeah, so I don't understand why they link truma to Shema. They're completely, there's nothing linking them at all.
Good. So you understand the question of the Gemara, because the Gemara is asking the same thing as Lance. Lance understood the question. And the question is, well, it's all very nice you're telling me that if a Kohen's in a state of Tumah, that he can't partake of the Truma like he could usually at any time of the day, and he has to immerse in a mikveh that day, and then in the evening at which the stars appear, he can partake of the Truma even though the sacrifice will only occur the next day. And by the way, at the time where they can eat their truma, when the three stars come out, that's when you do the Shema. Lance is right. What does that have to do with the Kohanim? Why not you just say the three stars come out? Why link the two? So the Gemara has the same question as you, Lance. It's saying like, what does the one have to do with the other? You can understand when there's a deadline to cut off time to link that to the Shema, but not the starting time. The two are irrelevant. So that's exactly the Gemara's question. So the Gemara answers it and it says, listen, Gavin's on the right track here. The Ketana wanted to teach us something else in passing, namely that when Kohanim who are Tameh permitted to eat Teruma, when are they? From the time the stars appear in the evening. And this is what the Tana means to teach us, that the atonement offering as a Tameh person must bring on the day after his immersion does not hold back a Kohen from becoming tahor in regard to his truma. So what happens is what you call we often get. Do you remember when we started, Lance? You weren't with us when we started Bavakama. It went off on a tangent. It was talking about the oven, the tordos of Shabbat. Then it was talking about discernible damage and his spiritual tuma considered discernible damage, because if wine has tuma, it doesn't mean it's wine that turned into vinegar where it's worth less. It's just not acceptable by Jews, but the quality hasn't diminished. So it was teaching this thing from Rav Oshia and Rav Chaya, and then it says while we're learning conversations with Oshia and Ashai and Rav Chaya, let's learn Rav Chaya, let's learn other things about them. So it goes off on a tangent to teach you in an organic way other lessons by using that as the springboard. So what's the springboard here? It says, listen, since we're going to mention Kohanim later in the end of the Shema, because it has that cutoff period of seriousness of kares or not missing a mitzvah opportunity to do the Shema, let's bring the Kohanim into this particular issue now. And let's just say the truth is that they can only eat teruma after immersion during the day when the stars appear in the evening. So you say, okay, so what's that meant to teach us? It's not meant to teach us anything about the Shema. You could simply say 3 stars come out. What it's meant to teach us is we do not expect the Kohen, because it's a crop, a teruma is a crop, it's not a sacrifice. It doesn't have to hold back a Kohen from becoming tahor in order to partake of his teruma. Do you understand what I'm saying? In other words, let me go through this. There are certain forms of tumah for which immersion in a mikveh does not suffice to render a person fully tahor, fully pure. Rather, the person must offer a set of sacrificial offerings on the day after his immersion. Okay? In other words, we wait not until nightfall, he immerses during that day. We wait until the next day to complete his tahara, his purity. Let me give you the 4 instances. You take a zav, where there's a seminal emission, a zava, menstrual period, or his wife's in a state of tumah. A woman who has given birth, the Cohen's wife, perhaps, and he was near her, or Mitzorah. Okay, this is in Christos 8b. By identifying the time when the evening Shema has to be recited, and you talk about the appearance of the stars, and you say, listen, this is when the Kohanim may eat their truma, the Tana is teaching you that as far as Kohanim are concerned, that were tama, impure, teruma is a crop, it's different. Is that the night after the immersion, even if they must still bring an offering the next day, whether the Kohen has been a Zavo Mitzorah or basically where the wife of the Kohen has been a Zavo, have given birth, it doesn't hold them back. They're not fully tahor yet. They're not fully pure before bringing their offerings. Immersion in a mikveh followed by nightfall still suffices to render them pure enough to eat the teruma. So their tara, their actual complete spiritual purity, remains incomplete only in regard to temple matters. In other words, eating actual meat of the sacrifices. So that's what it's actually coming to teach you, and that we would have never known. Okay, so
just explain that link again. I did hear you. Just sorry. I understand the con part. Just explain to me how it helps us with the Shema, knowing the fact that that you're partially pure by the time if you go the Kohen goes to the mikveh during the day, and at night he's partially pure enough to. How does it link to the Shema? Sorry, I didn't get that part.
No, you're totally right. It doesn't, and that was the problem with the Gemara. Exactly like Lance said. Like, what does the one have to do with the other? We can understand that if there's a deadline time in any midnight bound mitzvah, that it can bring a similar case for a mitzvah. But we don't understand why the starting time of that in the Shema has anything to do with the Kohanim. It's not a deadline that there'd be an opportunity loss or kares or anything. There's no link. You can just simply say 3 stars.
I thought you gave a justification now. That's what I thought you did.
No. I'm giving the justification according to what you said, and that justification is to teach us about Kohanim. Because when I brought Bava Kama, when we learned Bava Kama in the beginning, and Lance wasn't part of that, it would have driven Lance a little crazy. Because firstly, Lance, we're learning about Keren and Tam and Muad and all sorts of things, and it's going through the laws of Shabbos and the Tordas and the Avs. And then it has this argument on, do you pay for discernible damage and indiscernible? So discernible is if you leave wine out in the sun and it turns to vinegar, it's going to lose its value. You pay for that. And there was an argument between Rav Oshia and Rav Chia as to whether indiscernible damage is covered because you left it and it got tumah, but the quality of the wine hasn't diminished. But that has to relate to Bava Kama because it's a damages action. But then it goes off on a whole tangent and teaches us other arguments they had, which has nothing to do with laws of damages. But it says while we're on the subject of Rav Chia and Rav Osher, we're going to learn other things that they debated. That's how the Gemara goes in this like sort of tangent. Okay, it's organic. And what it did here, Gavin, was the same thing. It says, listen, I'm going to teach you something. That the earliest time you can do the Shema, when 3 minor stars come out. I'm going to teach you something. As far as the Kohen is concerned, it's the only time that they can partake in the Teruma. So you're saying, okay, so what does that have to do? We're going off on a tangent. What does that have to do with the Shema? Saying, no, we're not teaching you anything about the Shema. What we're doing is teaching you about Kohanim. Any meat sacrifice for a Zav, Zava, Matzorah, or a woman that's given birth, whether she's married to a Kohen or the Kohen himself, they can partake of the Truma before obviously bringing the sacrifice in the morning, but they're not fully pure. But anything to do with sacrificial meats, they can't dare partake of that until they wait for the next day to bring the sacrifice, and that completes their purity. Here they just have to be immersed and wait till nightfall. They need the sacrifice the next day. They're not fully pure, but they can still have the teruma. That's what it's coming to teach us. It's teaching us something else.
No. I thought you were trying to explain the link. I did actually hear you. So you were just explaining just that side of it. You weren't actually trying to link it at that point.
No, because what I said exactly what you did is like, what does the one thing have to do with another?
No, everything you said, I actually heard. I thought I missed the link. I thought you were trying to link it. That's why I said I didn't understand that. All right, no, it's fine. You haven't tried to link it yet. You haven't. Perfect.
Yeah. So that's it. So let me so that's what it's actually trying to tell us, is it's very different partaking from a crop compared to the sacrificial meats, where you have to wait till the next day and complete your purity process before you can enjoy it. It's also in Megillah 20b. So let's just go through one other quick point. We've got a few minutes. Let me just see what we've got. So the Gemara says, all right, fine, that's great. What's your spiritual source for this? We don't know. It's not open. It was taught in a brisa regarding a Kohen who became tamei and immersed himself, and when the sun comes down and the day has passed, and it uses this term vetahar. Well, actually, vitaher is actually the term, vitaher. And if you translate it, all right, so let me just say it a little bit easier. Vitaher means and when the sun comes down and the day has passed, when you're looking at it technically. So it says, the Torah states in the brisa regarding a Kohen who became tamei and immersed, thereafter he may eat from the holy foods. So it uses this term vitaher. And we learn from that the setting of the sun following his immersion is what holds him back from eating teruma. But his atonement offering that he must bring the next day does not hold him back from eating teruma. So what it's basically saying is he cannot eat the teruma even if he's immersed until the setting of the sun. That's what's holding him back. But not waiting for the sacrifice the next day. That doesn't hold him back from eating from the teruma part. That's the evidence from this brisa. Okay? And how do we know this? Is because if you look at Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 22, verse 7, it says, and when the sun has set, he shall become tahor. Thereafter he may eat from the holy foods. So there's the source, and it's in Vamos 74b. Okay. So the Gemara wants to question the understanding on the verse, and it says, look, there's a bit of a problem here, because on what basis do you conclude that this expression, and when the sun comes, means the setting of the sun? Because if you look at the word in English and in Aramaic, vitaher means and the sun comes. So Gavin, you can interpret it as two things. Does it mean when the sun comes up, or does it mean when the sun comes down to set? What does it mean? Because if you're saying when the sun comes up, it means you have to wait until the sacrificial offering is done, which is actually the opposite of what it's saying. If you're saying it comes when the sun comes to set, it's exactly what we're saying. So it says, how do you interpret this word vitaher, meaning the complete passing of a day? In other words, do we say, for example, anyway, like even a more specific definition, Do we say that when the sun's rays disappear completely and the stars come out? Is that it? Or when, like, you still see the ball of the sun, but it's not the heat of the day, or when the sun completely submerges to where you don't see the sun at all, or when there are three stars? It's a bit vague. So it says, how do you interpret it when the sun comes? Perhaps the expression, the Gemara says, means the coming of light, when the sun comes up in the morning of the eighth day. And what does v'taheh mean? It means that the person should make himself tahor by offering his sacrifice. It means opposite. So the verse would be teaching that the Kohen maybe eats his teruma only after he offers the atonement offering. So it's saying, like, how do you interpret this? We don't, by reading it, it could mean one or the other. So Rabba Bar Rav Shiller said, if so, that the verse is instructing the Kohen to bring his offering, it would use the yud. It would use the word not v'taher, but v'yitaher in the command form. Because it doesn't use that, it's proving that it's something that happens to the Kohen and not something that he's obligated to do. So let me just explain it to you like this. When Hashem expects something from the Kohen, guys, what it means is he's saying v'yitaher. You've got to be involved in a process, and there's a command to follow before you get to a state of purity. In other words, it's something action orientated for the Kohen, and it would use the yud. The fact that it says v'taher, not v'yitaher, means it's something that happens to the Kohen, like a day that passes. If it was to say, well, it's the next day, it means the Kohen is then required to do something, and it would use the verb by requiring him to bring his sacrifice. If the sacrifice was needed, not the rising of the sun. It's at the point of rising of the sun you can bring the sacrifice. The very fact that it didn't use the command form of the yud means it was a process that happened to the Kohen and to everybody else. It's the setting of a day. So it says there's no yud as a command, and it was something that happened not to the person, but to the circumstance. That is what we learn from Rabbi Bar Rav Shiller. Now, this is in Bavli, in Babylon. They didn't learn this in the West. What does the West refer to? Eretz Israel, because it's west of Babylon. So they didn't hear this exposition of Rabbi Bar Rav Shiller, and they said, all right, so how do we answer the question? You look at the word when the sun comes. Does it mean the sun comes up? The sun comes to set? What does v'tahar mean? Because we don't have that. So it says it means the person makes himself tahor by bringing his offering. Subsequently, they resolved the question from a brisa. They had to get a brisa. So it states in a brisa, a sign for this matter, for the time that a Kohen who was tameh may begin eating teruma is the appearance of the stars. And you learn this from the verse's expression, and when the sun comes means the setting of the sun. What does v'taher mean? It means the passing of the day. So how do we find this? Is that basically, since they didn't have Rabbi Bar Shiller's answer, they had to prove it simply by a brisa that stated that it mentions in Nagaim that it's the coming out of the stars. That's how they got the instruction that it actually is a time period and not an instruction by Kohen. You didn't even need the verbiage. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah, very clever.
Yeah. So I think on that note we're done. I think we did well.
You've only got a minute. Only got a
Yeah.
minute left anyway.
Kev, share.
Thanks, well done.
You want to share?
Man,
You want to speak?
Damon, just repeat that part about the time, first time. I'm just a bit tired, yeah.
Yeah, so
Just
no,
repeat that point.
the rabbis of Eretz Israel didn't use this yud of the command word via taher to know it was a Kohen command. So therefore they knew it was not required of the Kohen to actually do an activity like bring a sacrifice before he was pure. It was just a circumstance that happened to the Kohen as to the setting of the sun, because nothing was asked of him. If it meant the rising of the sun, it meant he was then. What's the point of the rising of the sun? To bring a sacrifice. You can't do that at night. So it was circumstantial as opposed to a commandment. And the rabbis of Eretz Yisrael didn't know that, so they had to use a brisa. And the brisa said when the stars come out. And that was very clear. It means when the sun set, that's it. All right, guys, I hope this was helpful. I went at a much quicker speed. Is it too fast? Is it
No,
too
it was
fast?
good. Good for me.
Okay. Lance, Kevin, I liked your questions. Kevin, I'll give you great empathy because of the dentist. And